The nurse knelt beside my hospital bed. Her voice gentle but shaky. "We called your son 23 times, she said. His final message was, 'Stop bothering me.'" I blinked at her, confused, certain I'd misheard. But the pity in her eyes told me I hadn't. I'd fallen, hard alone in my kitchen. A neighbor heard my cries and called the ambulance. Now here I was bruised, scared, abandoned. My son. My only child. The boy I raised with everything I had. He knew where I was. He just didn't care. And that's when the real pain began. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. People assume you forget things as you get older, but some memories grow sharper with time. The warmth of a small hand clinging to mine in the grocery store. The way his voice squeaked when he first learned to say mama. The smell of peanut butter and laundry soap on his school shirts. Those years live in me more vividly than yesterday. His name is Darren. I chose it because it sounded strong, like someone who would grow up brave. And for the longest time he was everything to me. My husband, George, died when Darren was just 6. A sudden heart attack. He was out mowing the lawn one summer afternoon. Then he was just gone. No warnings. No goodbyes. One minute we were a family, the next, I was a widow trying to explain to a little boy why daddy wouldn't be coming home. Darren cried for days. He would wake in the middle of the night calling for him, and I'd crawl into his tiny bed, holding him close while my own heart broke in silence. I didn't have the luxury to fall apart. I had to keep the roof over our heads. So I did what I always did. I worked. Nursing was never just a job for me. It was who I was. I'd spent 25 years tending to others, holding hands as people slipped away, cleaning wounds, warming soup, easing fear. But after George passed, I picked up every extra shift I could find. Night rounds, holiday rotations, overtime at the clinic. Anything to make sure Darren had what he needed. I packed his lunches every morning with little notes. "Be kind today," or "I love you to the moon." I taught him how to ride his bike, bandaged every scraped knee, and stood on the sidelines cheering at every school play and football game. There wasn't a moment of his childhood I missed, even if I was running on 3 hours of sleep. We weren't rich, but we had enough. And there was so much love. Darren would make me breakfast on Mother's Day, burnt toast and watery eggs, and I'd eat every bite like it was a feast. He'd bring me flowers he picked from the neighbor's garden and whisper, "Don't tell Mrs. Langston." When he turned 13, he got a paper route to help pay for his school trip. "You work too hard, Mom," he said. "I'm gonna take care of you someday." And I believed him. I remember his graduation. The way he scanned the crowd until he found me, then grinned and waved so hard I thought his arm would fall off. I'd saved for 2 years to buy him a used car. He cried when he saw it. Wrapped his arms around me in front of everyone. "You're the best, Mom," he said. "No one's ever gonna take better care of you than me." He got into college with a partial scholarship, and I covered the rest. I cashed out part of my retirement early. He didn't know. I didn't want him to feel guilty. That's what mothers do. We sacrifice, we give, we go without so our children can fly. And Darren flew. He got a job right after college. Sharp suit, new apartment, a girlfriend who seemed sweet. He called me every Sunday, sometimes twice a week. He brought her over for dinner, and I remember thinking how happy he looked, how proud he seemed to introduce me as his mom. We used to laugh a lot, Darren and I. Real, deep laughter. He'd tease me about my obsession with jigsaw puzzles. I'd tease him about his floppy hair, and the way he still couldn't boil pasta without overcooking it. I had this dream that someday he'd move back to town, maybe buy a house nearby, bring the grandkids over on weekends. I never imagined that all of it, all the love, all the years, all the little sacrifices, would turn into silence. But before the silence came, there was love. Real, honest love. And I hold on to that now, even as everything else has changed. The shift didn't come all at once. It was slow, like a leak in the ceiling you don't notice until the water stains have soaked through everything. It started with the calls. Darren used to phone me every Sunday morning, without fail. We'd talk about his week, what I'd planted in the garden, which patients I was caring for at the hospital. Then one week, he said he was busy. "Sorry, Mom. It's just been crazy. Can I call you tomorrow?" But tomorrow didn't come. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone gets busy. I told myself he was building his life, his career, his future. I reminded myself that this was what I'd worked so hard for, to give him wings. But as weeks passed, the calls became shorter, rushed, distracted. He'd pick up the phone with a clipped, "Hey mom," like I was a task he needed to check off his list. When I'd ask how he was, he'd say, "Fine, fine, same old." Then he'd trail off, and silence would settle in like fog. He married Lauren 2 years after they moved in together. I remember the day he told me over the phone. "We're keeping it small," he said. "Just a courthouse thing. No ceremony. No invitations. No family." He said they didn't want the fuss. I sent them a gift anyway. A handmade quilt I'd worked on for months. I never heard back about it. After that, I was invited less and less. Holidays were too hectic, and birthdays were already planned. I didn't push. I told myself they were adjusting to married life. I made excuses for them because that's what mothers do. Then came the finances. Darren offered to help with my bills. "You're getting older, Mom," he said. "Let me take care of the paperwork. It's all online now anyway." It sounded kind, generous even. I gave him access to my bank account, just to help with monthly transfers and insurance. I didn't realize then how naive I was being. But I trusted him. He was my son. Over time, I noticed certain things. I'd ask about a check that hadn't arrived, and he'd wave it off. "You probably forgot, Mom. I'll look into it." When I mentioned a charge I didn't recognize, he'd say, "Oh, that's just a routine fee." The worst part was how subtle the disrespect became. Little comments here and there. "Don't strain yourself trying to remember, Mom. Are you sure you want to wear that to dinner? You already told us that story twice." At first, I laughed with them, tried to stay lighthearted. But Lauren's eyes would glaze over when I spoke, and Darren would glance at his phone uninterested. I began to feel like background noise. An old book on a shelf, once loved, now untouched. One Thanksgiving, I offered to bring my famous green bean casserole. Darren smiled tightly. Lauren's mom already made one, and we're trying to avoid too many repeats. Maybe just bring some rolls. Rolls. I'd been cooking Thanksgiving dinner for him since he was 6 years old. I used to wake at dawn to baste the turkey, make everything from scratch. And now, I was downgraded to store-bought bread. I didn't argue. I brought the rolls. And I smiled when I handed them over, even as my hands trembled. That day, I noticed something else. I was sitting at the end of the table, far from Darren and Lauren, far from the conversations. No one asked me about my work. No one asked if I was tired or cold or needed anything. I refilled my own water. I cleared my own plate. And when I said goodbye that night, Darren hugged me with one arm, already half turned toward the door. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before driving away. It was the first time I cried on a holiday. From that moment on, something shifted inside me. A quiet ache began to bloom. I tried to bury it, busied myself with books, gardening, volunteering at the clinic. But the silence in my house grew heavier. My phone rang less. My mailbox filled with more bills than letters. When I did speak to Darren, there was always a reason he couldn't talk long. Conference call in 5. Lauren's got a headache. Can you email me instead? He stopped calling me Mom. Sometimes he didn't call me anything at all. One day, I asked if he and Lauren might like to come visit. "I made extra chicken pot pie," I said. "Remember how much you used to love it?" There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Mom, it's just not practical to drive all the way out there for dinner." "It's a 40-minute drive," I said quietly. "Exactly." That was when I stopped asking. I wasn't sure what hurt more, their absence, or the way they made me feel when they were present. Like I was inconvenient. Embarrassing. A fragile old woman they were tolerating out of obligation. But I wasn't fragile. Not yet. And I wasn't ready to be forgotten. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, and maybe that's what made it hurt the most. It started with a letter. I'd gone in for a routine checkup and mentioned to the nurse that I hadn't received my insurance renewal packet. She checked the system and frowned. "Ma'am, your coverage was terminated 3 months ago. It says here the payment was stopped from the account on file." I sat there, confused. Darren had told me not to worry. He was handling the premiums himself. Said it was easier that way. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my son. I left the clinic that day with a pounding heart and a folder of unpaid bills. I called him that night. My hands were shaking. Hey Mom. I'm in the middle of something, he answered, distracted. Darren, I said, trying to steady my voice. I was at the doctor today. They said my insurance was canceled. There was a pause. I imagined him glancing at Lauren across the room, deciding what to say. Oh yeah, he said slowly. We had to make some budget adjustments. Without telling me? It's not a big deal, he said. You're not getting any younger, Mom. These policies cost a fortune at your age. It's just not sustainable. I couldn't speak. I could feel my throat closing. I trusted you, I finally said. He scoffed. Don't be so dramatic. Those words rang in my ears long after the call ended. A few weeks later, I was invited to a dinner party at Darren's new house. I hadn't been over before. It was big. New countertops, fancy lighting, custom floors. Lauren met me at the door with a stiff smile. Try not to talk politics at the table, she whispered. My parents are here. I blinked. I don't talk politics. She shrugged and walked away. At the table, I was seated next to a young woman I didn't know. Darren sat at the other end with Lauren's parents, laughing, swirling wine. He barely looked at me. At one point, someone asked about retirement plans. I laughed and said, well, I can't afford to retire just yet. Nursing's in my bones anyway. Lauren looked at Darren and muttered, we're still figuring out her situation. Their situation. That was when I realized they'd stopped seeing me as a person. I had become a situation. An inconvenience to manage. After dinner, I walked out to my car alone. No one offered to walk me. No one thanked me for coming. As I drove away, tears blurred the streetlights into halos. I had never felt more out of place in my own family. But the worst came a month later. I was at the grocery store when I ran into an old friend from church, Marla. We hadn't spoken in years, but we hugged and caught up in the cereal aisle. At one point, she leaned in and said, I heard from someone that Darren and Lauren are looking into a care facility for you. Is everything all right? I stared at her, stunned. A what? She backtracked quickly. Oh, I don't know anything for sure. I just overheard it at bridge night. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my purse. When I got home, I sat in the kitchen and stared at nothing. My son was making plans behind my back. Not talking with me. Not checking in on me. Just deciding. Like I wasn't even there. I tried to convince myself there had been a misunderstanding. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Something had been shifting for a long time, and I had ignored it. That Sunday, I decided to test the waters. I called Darren and asked if he and Lauren might like to come over for dinner next weekend. There was a pause. Next weekend, he asked. Yes, I said. I thought we could have a meal. Just the three of us. Catch up. He sighed. Actually, Lauren's parents are staying over. And we've got a bunch going on. I didn't say anything. He added, you know, Mom, maybe it's time we talk about some long-term care options. You've been having trouble remembering things, and, well, we just want what's best for you. There it was. Said like a kindness. Packaged in concern. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the kind that slips out when the weight gets too heavy. I see, I said. You're not angry, are you? He asked. No, I said. Not angry. Just surprised. He said, we'll talk soon. And hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house so quiet it rang in my ears. Later that night, I looked around. At the worn table, the curtains I'd sewn myself. The old clock that still ticked in the hall. This was my home. I'd raised him here. I'd built our life here. And now he wanted to erase me from it. Quietly. Politely. I wasn't invited to their next gathering. I only found out about it from a neighbor who saw their driveway packed with cars. They weren't just forgetting me. They were replacing me. The moment I knew it wasn't just neglect, but something darker, came on a Wednesday morning, a day after my 73rd birthday. I hadn't heard from Darren or Lauren. Not even a text. No call. No card. Nothing. I told myself they'd just forgotten, but the ache in my chest said otherwise. That morning, I stood by the window sipping my coffee when I noticed Lauren's car parked outside. She never came without Darren. I didn't hear the doorbell. Just her voice, soft and hurried, leaking through the cracked open window of the living room. She was standing on the porch with someone on the phone. No, she's still there. Yes, by herself. I've already looked into the one off Meadow Creek, but they don't have a vacancy. No, Darren won't call her again. He said it's not his job to convince her. He's done. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Then came the words that made my stomach twist. She won't even know the difference once she's moved in. Honestly, the sooner we get this sorted, the better. She's not capable of managing her own life anymore. I backed away from the window, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the mug. My heart thudded in my ears. It wasn't just idle talk. It was a plan. A quiet, well-orchestrated plan to take my life from under me. Lauren didn't even come inside. She left without knocking. I didn't move for hours. I sat in George's old recliner, staring at the wall, hearing her words over and over. She won't even know the difference. I did know. I knew exactly what they were doing. That night, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The one where I kept letters, photos, pieces of my life. I pulled out the stack of birthday cards Darren had made for me as a boy, crayon drawings, scribbled hearts, messages like, "I'll love you forever, Mommy." I traced the letters with my fingers, wondering how that boy had become the man plotting to discard me like furniture that no longer fit the house. Then I found the letter George wrote me before he passed. I hadn't read it in years. "Marjorie, if you're reading this, it means I left earlier than we planned. You were always the strong one. Even if you didn't believe it, you're going to be okay. And if life ever makes you feel small, I want you to remember. You built this family with your hands and your heart. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in what you created. Love you always, George." I held that letter to my chest and wept. The next day, I began to see everything differently. Every silence, every forgotten call, every small act of dismissal. It had all been adding up to this. I started paying closer attention. Mail had gone missing. A bill for property tax I never saw. A bank statement I never received. I called my bank and asked to review my statements. I didn't recognize some of the transactions. Small withdrawals. Transfers. Darren's name on them. When I confronted him, calmly over the phone, he got defensive. "I told you I'd take care of things. You're too old to be managing finances." "I'm not senile," I said. "Don't be paranoid, Mom. You're starting to sound unstable." There it was. The foundation of their plan. If they could make me look unstable, they could justify anything. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Later that week, one of the nurses at the clinic pulled me aside. She was young, kind, always called me Miss Marjorie, even though we worked side by side. She looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say anything," she began. "But someone from your family called the clinic last month, asking about your cognitive records. They wanted to know if we had anything on file that could show early dementia symptoms." I stared at her, stunned. "I told them we don't share anything without your consent. But I thought you should know." I thanked her and walked straight out of the building, my legs trembling beneath me. They weren't just planning to move me. They were building a case, painting me as confused, fragile, replaceable. I went home and sat on my porch, the fall air sharp in my lungs. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, but not helpless. That evening, I pulled out a notebook and started writing things down. Dates, conversations, names. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew I needed to protect myself. Protect the life I'd built. And the voice in my head, George's voice, kept whispering, "Don't let them take what you built." So I stopped waiting for Darren to remember who I was. I started remembering it for myself. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I waited until a Sunday afternoon to call Darren. I knew he'd be home. It was football season, and he never missed a game. I timed it on purpose. I didn't want him relaxed. I wanted him caught off guard. He answered with a short, impatient, "Yeah." Hi, sweetheart. Do you have a moment? I asked, keeping my voice even. Make it quick. The game's on. Typical. I wanted to talk about the house, I said. About what Lauren said on the porch. There was a pause. What are you talking about? I heard her. Last week. I was inside. She didn't knock, just stood on my porch making phone calls about placing me somewhere. Another pause. You must have misheard, he said. Lauren would never. I didn't mishear, Darren. My tone sharpened for the first time. She said I wouldn't even know the difference once I was moved. Silence. A long, tight silence. Then came the pivot. We're trying to help you, Mom. You live alone. You've fallen. Twice. It's not safe. You don't drive much anymore. It's just time. You mean time to make decisions without me? To pretend I'm not capable? He sighed, a frustrated exhale. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said. You're minimizing me. And I won't let you. There was an edge in his voice now. Fine. You want the truth? Lauren and I can't keep babysitting you. You're not independent anymore, and it's exhausting. I gripped the edge of the counter. Babysitting. That was the word he used. I steadied myself. So all the years I took care of you, was I babysitting? He didn't answer. I could hear the game in the background. I wiped your tears, cleaned your scraped knees, sat up with you through every fever. I didn't ask to be thanked. I did it because I loved you. And now that I'm old, I'm a burden. His voice cracked slightly. Mom, it's not like that. Then tell me how it is. Silence. You said you'd take care of me, I said, softer now. When you were 17, you stood in that kitchen and said, no one will ever take better care of you than me. He didn't deny it. Didn't even acknowledge it. I need to go, he said. Lauren's calling. And then the line went dead. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Later that week, a neighbor named Evelyn came by. She's 80, sharp as a tack, and one of the few people I trust. You look pale, she said. Sit down before you fall over. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing tighter with every word. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, Marjorie, I've lived long enough to know when someone's being pushed out of their own life. And you? You're being shoved. She handed me a card. A lawyer. He helped my sister when her kids tried to take her house. You should talk to him. That night, I stared at the card on my nightstand. I'd never imagined needing a lawyer to protect myself from my own child. But here I was. And suddenly, a shift began inside me. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The sorrow I'd been drowning in all these months began to harden into something else. Resolve. They thought I'd go quietly. That I'd be too confused, too grateful, too broken to resist. They didn't realize who raised Darren. They didn't realize she was still alive in me. I began gathering everything. Bank statements. Voicemails. The recorded call from the clinic. Even receipts from years ago showing the early withdrawal from my retirement savings. The one I made to put Darren through school. Proof that I'd given everything. I found the folder I used for taxes and labeled it in thick black marker. In case I'm erased. And just like that, the plan was no longer theirs. It was mine. The lawyer's office was tucked inside a modest brick building on Maple Avenue, just 2 blocks from where George and I had our first apartment. I hadn't been down that street in years. The trees still lined the sidewalks like old friends. The air was cool, crisp. It smelled like October and change. The receptionist greeted me kindly, offered tea. Her voice reminded me of a younger nurse I used to train. Bright but uncertain, watching for signs in the eyes of the elderly. I looked her dead in the eye, steady as ever. The lawyer, Mr. Hensley, was older than I expected, with silver hair and tired hands. He didn't talk down to me. He didn't use sweetheart or dear. He sat across from me like I mattered. Tell me what brought you in today, he said gently. I took a deep breath. Then I opened the folder I'd been building for weeks. I laid out the bank statements, the missing mail, the transcripts I'd typed up from overheard phone calls, the notes from my doctor confirming I had full mental clarity. I even brought copies of the letter George had written before he passed. I didn't plan to show that one, but I needed it close. Mr. Hensley took his time, skimming, occasionally nodding, eyebrows tightening in places. When he finished, he folded his hands. Mrs. Alden, he said slowly, you've documented everything beautifully. And you're well within your rights to protect your estate and autonomy. The words didn't comfort me. They just confirmed the weight I already carried. This was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding or miscommunication. It was betrayal in plain ink. I want to change my will, I said. I want my son removed entirely. Do you have any other heirs in mind? I hesitated. Not family, no. I'd like the house and savings to go toward a local nursing program. Scholarships, training, especially for in-home care. I've seen how that kind of care can preserve dignity. I want to give that to someone. He nodded. And you're certain about excluding your son? I looked at him. He's already excluded me. He was quiet a moment. Would you like to add a no contest clause? What's that? If your son tries to challenge the will after you pass, the entire estate would be forfeited to a third party. Charity usually. It's a way to discourage tampering. I thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Let it go to charity. Let him know I meant every word. He began drafting the paperwork. It took 2 hours. During that time, I sat quietly, looking out the window at a maple tree shedding gold leaves across the sidewalk. I remembered raking leaves with Darren as a child. How he'd jump in the piles laughing, leaves stuck to his hair. The memory stung now. Grief has a way of blending with rage, until you can't tell them apart. When Mr. Hensley brought the final documents to me, I read them line by line. My name, my assets, my wishes. When I signed, my hand didn't shake. The hardest part was leaving the office. Not because I had doubts, but because it felt like a burial. Not of my money, or the house, but of the hope that things could still be fixed. I walked to the corner cafe where George and I used to get coffee after church. It had changed hands, but the smell was the same, roasted beans and cinnamon rolls. I sat alone by the window with a cup of black coffee, and folded the will into my purse. This was never how I imagined growing old. I thought I'd be surrounded by grandkids, with Darren dropping by on Sundays to fix a leaky faucet or ask for my apple pie recipe. I thought I'd grow forgetful in a house full of laughter, not alone, alert, documenting my own defense. But here's what I knew now. Darren didn't earn the future I had once planned to give him. I had. I earned this house. Every beam, every brick, every sleepless night I spent working double shifts. I earned the right to decide how my story ends. I left the cafe and walked home slowly. The breeze had picked up, scattering leaves across my path. When I reached my porch, I looked at the place Lauren had stood, making her quiet little plans. I smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought I was powerless, that my silence was weakness. But I was never silent. I was listening. And now, I was speaking, loud and clear. It was a letter that finally broke the last piece of my heart. A large white envelope slid through my mail slot one morning, crisp and official looking. The return address was from a law office I didn't recognize. I stood at the kitchen counter, hesitating for a moment before opening it, heart already uneasy. Inside were several neatly stapled pages, documents declaring an intention to pursue guardianship over me. Guardianship. Darren and Lauren were formally petitioning the court to declare me incapable of managing my affairs. They claimed I was forgetful, disoriented, prone to confusion. They cited concerns for her safety and consistent memory lapses. They lied. Right there in legal language, they were trying to strip away everything I had left, my independence, my decisions, my home. I sank into the nearest chair, the documents trembling in my hands. My name was printed over and over in cold legalese, as if I were a problem to be handled. A burden to be transferred. A box to be checked. And the part that broke me open, the part one had to read twice to believe, was the mention of my house being impractical for someone in her condition. They were preparing to sell it. Sell it. My house. George's house. The one I'd scrubbed, painted, patched, and warmed with my own 2 hands for over 4 decades. They didn't even have the decency to speak to me first. They were erasing me, paper by paper, line by line. I didn't cry. Not that day. I sat at the table for a long time, rereading every line until the ink blurred. Then I stood, folded the papers, and walked them into the room I used to call Darren's. I laid them on his childhood desk, next to his old soccer trophy and a faded photo of us at the zoo. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up packing a small box, my will, the guardianship notice, copies of emails, old birthday cards, the insurance letter. I labeled the folder. Final straw. The next morning, I took a slow walk through every room of my home. I touched the doorknobs, the banister George installed, the windows I'd cleaned every spring. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and remembered Darren dancing on the tile floor with a colander on his head, pretending to be a knight. That boy was gone, and I wasn't going to let the man he became steal the last pieces of my life. I put on my nicest coat, the one with the pearl buttons, and stepped outside. It was brisk, clear, the kind of morning that makes you feel awake in your bones. I walked to the end of the block and caught the bus into town. First, I stopped by Mr. Hensley's office and handed him the guardianship petition. "This just arrived," I said calmly. He read it, lips pursed. "Do you want to contest it formally?" "I want to make it public," I said. "I want my voice heard before they can silence it." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll respond and we'll do it thoroughly." Next, I visited the copy shop and printed 5 sets of everything. My will, the petition, the documentation I'd gathered. And finally, I made one more stop. An invitation-only dinner Darren and Lauren were hosting for Darren's firm's promotion celebration. I had found out about it by accident. A former coworker of mine was invited. Her niece worked at the same company. She mentioned it without knowing the irony. I wasn't invited, but I planned to attend anyway. The day of the event, I dressed carefully. My navy blue dress, black shoes, George's silver locket around my neck. Inside it was a tiny photo of Darren at age 7. I almost took it out. Instead, I left it there, reminding me of the boy I once loved so fiercely. I arrived at the venue 5 minutes after the start time. The room was full, men in suits, women with glasses of wine, white tablecloths, soft jazz humming in the background. Heads turned when I entered. I saw Darren across the room, standing beside Lauren, laughing with a group of colleagues. His smile dropped the moment he saw me. He walked over, stiff and urgent. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I smiled, calm as a breeze. "Just dropping something off." I reached into my bag and handed him an envelope. "This is what you've been working on behind my back. I thought everyone should see the results." He looked inside, confused. Then his face paled. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said under his breath. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm not confused, Darren. I'm not disoriented. I am awake, and I see you now. I see what you've become." Lauren joined us, face tight with panic. "This isn't the place." "You made it the place," I said. "By turning my life into a secret project. A quiet removal. You don't get to control the story anymore." I turned, walked calmly to a nearby table, and handed another envelope to one of Darren's co-workers. Then another to his supervisor. "Just some family documents," I said. "In case you hear rumors." The room fell into a thick, awkward silence. I didn't stay long. Just long enough. I walked out into the cool night, breath rising in little clouds, my shoulders finally straight. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I showed them exactly who I was. The invitation came in the mail a week later. A thick, glossy card addressed in Lauren's handwriting. It was for Jacob's 4th birthday, my grandson. My only grandchild. I held it in my hands for several minutes, unsure if it was a peace offering or a setup. Maybe Lauren thought I wouldn't come after the scene at Darren's work dinner. Maybe she sent it to look polite, knowing full well I wouldn't show my face again. But I would. Not for them, but for Jacob. That child had done nothing wrong. He was the one part of my son that hadn't yet been corrupted by indifference. So I put on my beige sweater, the one with the stitched roses, and I walked into that party holding nothing but truth in my bag. The house was loud with chatter, laughter, the shrill squeals of children. Balloons bobbed from railings, and there was a rented clown making balloon swords in the backyard. Lauren spotted me first. Her smile faltered. Darren followed a moment later, and his face stiffened with something between anger and dread. I gave a gentle wave and made my way to the kitchen, where I set down a small wrapped gift. A book I used to read to Darren when he was little, The Velveteen Rabbit. I didn't approach them. I let the party swirl around us like a tide. I watched Jacob laugh as he rode a plastic pony in the yard. I let the warmth of the day settle into my skin. And then, when the cake was brought out and everyone gathered in the living room, I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Before the cake, I'd like to say something." Darren's eyes widened. "Mom, now is not the. It'll only take a minute," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I promise." Lauren stood frozen beside him, holding the cake knife. The room fell still. I pulled a small folder from my bag and held it in my hands. "I want to thank everyone for being here, for celebrating Jacob, who is a light in this world. I hope he grows up surrounded by love. Real love." A murmur passed through the room. "But I also want to make something clear. I may be 73. I may live alone. But I am not invisible. I am not senile. I am not a problem to be solved." I turned toward Darren, who was trying to wave his hands in quiet panic. "I know about the petition. I know you tried to declare me unfit. I know you planned to sell my home. And I know it wasn't because you cared." "Mom, stop," Darren said through clenched teeth. "No," I said calmly. "I won't be quiet anymore." I looked around at the guests, some confused, some curious, a few visibly uncomfortable. I gave everything I had to raise my son. I worked nights. I emptied my savings. I stood by him in every season of his life. And now, when I needed help, not money, not even time, just respect, I was treated like a burden. Lauren finally stepped forward. "This isn't the time or place." "But it is the truth," I said, voice steady. "I have made arrangements. My will has been changed. My lawyer is prepared. And if either of them," I nodded toward Darren and Lauren, "attempt to contest it, the entirety of my estate will go to charity." Darren looked like he'd been slapped. "I came here not to embarrass anyone. I came here because this is my family too. Because Jacob deserves to know who I was. Even if you've forgotten." I paused, then reached into my bag again and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to Darren. He took it reluctantly. "It's a photo," I said. "From the day you were born. I was holding you, crying with joy. I swore then I'd protect you always. I never thought I'd have to protect myself from you." He opened the envelope, glanced at the photo, then looked away. I turned back to the room. "Enjoy the cake." And I walked out. Outside, the air felt cooler than before. Lighter. I heard the door shut behind me but didn't look back. The truth had been spoken. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Do you think the mother made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The silence after the birthday party was thicker than ever before. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a knock on the door. I half expected Darren to show up, angry, demanding an apology, desperate to do damage control. But the days passed and nothing came. At first, the quiet gnawed at me. I kept checking my phone as if it had simply malfunctioned. I peeked through the curtains in the evenings, expecting a car to pull into the driveway. But there was nothing. Eventually, the ache in my chest gave way to a strange kind of peace. Like an infection finally draining from the body. I realized I wasn't waiting for him anymore. He had made his choice. And for the first time in years, I had made mine. The town, of course, had heard everything within days. Small towns have long memories and fast mouths. People at the grocery store eyed me with curiosity. A few women from church offered forced smiles, hesitant to take sides. But others came closer. Evelyn dropped off homemade soup without saying a word. She just handed me the jar and gave my hand a firm squeeze. One of the younger nurses from the clinic, Marissa, stopped me at the library. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "You're stronger than most people I know." Stronger. That word used to feel like a compliment. Now it just felt like the truth. I had to be strong. There was no other choice. With each day that passed, I began reclaiming pieces of myself I didn't know I'd lost. I took long walks in the park, beneath trees George once loved to photograph. I dug into the earth of my garden, planting marigolds along the fence. I read old letters, made fresh tea, and stopped apologizing for taking up space. I even pulled out George's fishing rod from the garage, just to hold it for a while. The cork grip was worn and familiar. He'd always promised we'd go one more time. Life had stolen that promise, but not the memory. One morning, I wandered down to the lake and sat on our favorite bench. A breeze rippled across the water, stirring the reeds. "I did it, George," I whispered. I stood up. The wind rustled the leaves, and I swear I could feel his hand resting gently on my shoulder. Not warm, not heavy, but there. Later that week, a knock finally came. It wasn't Darren. It was Jacob. He stood at the door with a shy smile, holding the book I'd given him at the party, The Velveteen Rabbit. "Mommy said I could bring this back to you," he said, eyes wide. I bent down slowly, knees creaking, and took the book. "Did you read it?" He nodded. "The bunny gets old. But he's real. Because someone loved him." My throat tightened. "That's right," I whispered. "Are you sad?" he asked suddenly, childlike and blunt. "Yes," I said. "But not as much as before." He reached into his little pocket and pulled out a wrinkled sticker. "It's a star," he said proudly. "You can have it." I took it like it was made of gold. He gave me a quick hug, awkward and sweet, then ran back down the walkway where a car waited, Lauren in the driver's seat, not looking my way. But Jacob looked back and waved. That wave carried me through the next week. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even a beginning. But it was something real. And at my age, you learn to cherish the real things. The silence remained after that, but it no longer felt hollow. It felt earned. It was the quiet of having nothing to prove, nothing to beg for. I began writing again, just little things. Notes to myself. Letters to George. Stories I remembered from my childhood. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like mine again. I found a rhythm. Tea at dawn, a walk by noon, a chapter of a book before bed. Simple, steady things that didn't ask for anyone's permission. And then one afternoon, Marissa from the clinic knocked on my door. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About dignity. About being seen." She explained she was starting a mentorship group for younger caregivers and wanted to create a space for retired nurses to share their wisdom. "We could meet here if you're willing," she said, looking around at the old house. I looked at the walls, the quiet halls, the sunlight pouring through the lace curtains. "Yes," I said. "I think that's a beautiful idea." The first meeting took place in my living room, just 3 weeks later. There were 6 of us, 3 young nursing students, 2 aides from the clinic, and me. I brewed a large pot of coffee and set out slices of lemon pound cake on George's old ceramic plates. It felt like a Sunday gathering, warm and easy. Marissa introduced everyone, then turned to me. "Miss Marjorie, would you mind starting us off? Maybe tell us a little about why you chose nursing." I sat back, the sunlight warming my hands, and told them. About my first night shift at the hospital. About the war vet who held my hand as he passed. About the young mother with cancer, who taught me more about grace than any textbook ever could. They listened, really listened. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was still useful. Still full of something worth giving. When they left, I stood at the window watching them walk to their cars, laughing and chatting. My home echoed with the sound of something I hadn't heard in years. Hope. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote in thick pen, "Marjorie's house." And below it, a place for learning, healing, and beginning again. I didn't know exactly what it would become, but the idea had taken root. Over the next few days, I started making calls to the community center, the local college's nursing program, the Council on Aging. I wasn't asking for money. I was offering space. A safe place for training sessions, mentorship, even temporary housing for students on rotation. The responses were enthusiastic, even emotional. "There's such a need," one director said. "You'd be making a real difference." I cleared out Darren's old room, boxed up his trophies, folded away the faded blankets. It hurt, but in a cleansing way, like tearing off a bandage that had stayed too long. The room looked brighter without the dust of memory. Next, I cleared George's study, opening drawers filled with old tax returns, camera film, and half-written notes about fishing trips we never took. I kept only the photographs, the ones he loved most. I framed a few and hung them in the hallway. Then I opened the back guest room. That one had been untouched for years. I aired it out, scrubbed the floors, patched a crack in the windowsill. By the end of the week, my house looked like it had been waiting for something all along. I met with Mr. Hensley again, and updated my will one more time. We added a trust to support the house's future purpose. An ongoing fund to keep it alive long after I was gone. Do you want to name it officially? He asked. I smiled. Marjorie's house, I said. Let it carry my name. Not out of pride, but to remind people I was here. He nodded, eyes warm. It's a good name. Word began to spread slowly, as all good things do in small towns. Neighbors dropped by with used furniture, curtains, and used notebooks. One woman donated 3 brand-new hospital bed trays. A retired carpenter offered to fix the back steps for free. Even the postman asked if we'd need help with mail once we got busy. Something was growing here. And it had nothing to do with bloodlines or inheritances. It had everything to do with purpose. One afternoon, I found a box on my porch, no note, no sender. Inside was the quilt I'd made for Darren and Lauren's wedding. Folded perfectly, not a thread out of place. I didn't need a signature to know who had returned it. I stood there for a long time, hands pressed against the fabric, remembering the hours I'd spent sewing it, each stitch a silent prayer for their happiness. I didn't cry. I simply folded it again and placed it in the guest room closet. Maybe someone else would need it someday. Someone who would appreciate the warmth it carried. The next meeting at Marjorie's house had twice as many people. This time, one of the students brought her teenage daughter. Another asked if she could host a first aid course in the living room. I said yes to all of it. They laughed in my kitchen, spilled coffee on my table, forgot to wipe their shoes. And I loved every moment of it. The house felt alive. Not with ghosts, but with new beginnings. And I felt free. Not from age. Not from sorrow. But from silence. I had been quiet for too long, swallowed too many hurts, buried too many needs. Now every voice that echoed through these walls reminded me, I still mattered. Not as Darren's mother, but as Marjorie. It started with small moments. A knock at the door just before sunset. One of the nursing students bringing by a pie she had made too much of. A handwritten thank you note from a teenage girl who had sat in on our first aid session and decided she wanted to become a nurse. A jar of homemade apple butter from a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. They didn't call me Miss Alden. They called me Marjorie. And when they came through the door, they brought laughter, warmth, and stories. Some stayed to chat. Others helped clean up after meetings without being asked. One evening, after the group had left, I walked through the house, the faint scent of coffee and conversation still lingering in the air. I passed by the photos of George and paused at the one of Darren as a boy. For the first time, I didn't feel hollow when I looked at it. I just felt grateful that I had loved someone so deeply, even if that love had gone unreturned. But something else began to happen, too. Something I hadn't expected. The people who came to Marjorie's house didn't just take. They gave. A young woman named Janelle, just 22 and in her second year of nursing school, came every week without fail. She stayed late to help wash mugs, reorganized my bookshelves, and once even trimmed the rose bushes along the fence. She never said much about her own family, but one night after everyone had left, she lingered in the kitchen. Can I ask you something? She said, fiddling with a spoon. Of course. Would it be weird if I called you something else? I smiled. Depends on what it is. She hesitated, cheeks pink. I don't really have a grandmother. Not one who cares. And I know it's silly, but would it be okay if I called you Nana Marjorie? For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just reached for her hand and squeezed it. Of course it's okay, I whispered. And just like that, a thread wove itself between us. Janelle wasn't the only one. An older gentleman named Saul, a retired veteran who now volunteered at the clinic, began stopping by just to sit on the porch and talk about old movies and the way coffee used to taste better in the 70s. He brought a folding chair and parked it right next to mine every Thursday afternoon. Feels like home here, he told me once. Not because of the walls. Because of the welcome. Even the quiet ones opened up over time. There was a girl named Elise, just out of high school, who attended every single meeting but barely said a word. She helped stack chairs, refilled the sugar jar, swept the porch. And then one day, she left a note on my front step. "Thank you for making space for people like me. I never thought I had anything to offer until I heard your story." I read that note 3 times before placing it in the drawer with George's letter. Real family, I was learning, wasn't bound by blood or marriage. It wasn't built through obligation. It was built through care, through presence, through the small, consistent acts of showing up. And the strangest part? I didn't miss Darren. I missed the boy he used to be. But the man who ignored my hospital calls, who planned my erasure, he was no longer someone I longed for. Lauren never came by, but sometimes I saw her car parked down the street, windows up, engine off, watching, maybe curious, maybe ashamed. I never approached her. I didn't need to. But then one afternoon, as the autumn leaves began turning gold and orange, a quiet knock came at my door. It was Lily, my granddaughter. I hadn't seen her since she was a toddler. Now she stood taller than me, her dark hair pulled back, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked nervous, like she was bracing for rejection. "Hi," she said softly. I hope it's okay that I came." I opened the door wider. "Of course it's okay." She stepped inside, eyes scanning the house. "It looks like I remember. Just smaller," she said with a shy smile. We sat in the living room. She told me she was starting college, considering nursing, unsure of what path to follow. I asked if she remembered the book I'd given Jacob. "I read it," she said. "Twice." We talked for hours. About nothing and everything. I learned she loved poetry. That she missed me even when she didn't fully understand why I was gone. That she always thought of me when she saw sunflowers. Before she left, she hugged me. A full, long hug. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have anything to be sorry for," I replied. "You're here. That's enough." As she walked down the path, I saw Janelle arrive from the other direction. She waved to Lily, then to me. Moments later, Saul's truck pulled up to drop off a broken lamp he'd fixed for the back room. And I realized something that stole my breath for a moment. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home. And the people in it? They were my real family. Not by blood, but by heart. It was just after the first snowfall when he came. I had just finished sweeping the porch, brushing light powder off the steps so no one would slip on their way in. I'd always loved the quiet after snow. How everything seemed softer, like the world had paused to listen. That's when I heard the car door shut. I turned, broom still in hand, and there he was. Darren. He looked older. Not in the way people age with grace, but in the way regret pulls at the skin. His hair was thinner. His eyes, once so bright when he'd come running to me as a boy, looked dull and tired. He stood by the gate for a moment, uncertain, as if waiting to be invited. I didn't move to open it. Eventually he pushed it himself and walked up the path slowly. No grand gestures. No fake smiles. Just silence and cold air between us. "Hi, Mom," he said. It was the first time he'd called me that in nearly a year. I nodded once. "Darren." He glanced around the porch. "Looks different." "It is," I said. "It's mine again." He looked down, hands buried in his coat pockets. "I didn't come to fight. I didn't invite you to," I said plainly. He nodded, accepting the weight of my words. "I got your letter. The one your lawyer sent." "Then you know where everything stands." "I do." Another pause. The wind stirred a few dry leaves across the driveway. "I didn't think it would go that far," he admitted. "I thought you were just angry." "I was," I said. But then I realized anger isn't enough. I had to protect myself. From my own son. He winced but didn't deny it. "I'm not proud of what I did," he said after a long silence. "I let Lauren take over. I let my own comfort matter more than your dignity. I didn't realize how far we'd gone until that night at Jacob's party." I didn't speak. I wanted to let him feel the weight of his own words. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said quietly. "Because I'm not offering it. Not today." He nodded again, slower this time. I figured. But I will offer you something, I added. The truth. His eyebrows lifted, but he said nothing. You broke something in me, Darren. Not just with the guardianship or the silence. With the forgetting. You forgot who I was. What I did. What I gave. He looked away, jaw clenched. And still, I continued. There's a part of me that will always love the boy you once were. The one who brought me dandelions and promised to take care of me when I was old. He swallowed hard. I don't hate you, I said. But I don't trust you anymore. And that's something we can't get back. He nodded slowly, eyes wet now, though he didn't let the tears fall. I just wanted to see you, he said. One more time. Before everything's finalized. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stepped aside and opened the door to the house. Not wide, just a crack. From the hallway inside, voices could be heard. Janelle laughing with Saul, the kettle beginning to hiss on the stove, someone tuning a guitar for the evening gathering. Darren glanced toward the sound. Who's here? Family, I said. His eyes flicked toward mine again. He understood. Not invited. Not included. Not anymore. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. This was Grandma's, he said, handing it to me. It was in one of my old boxes. Figured you should have it. I took it carefully, unwrapping it to find my mother's old brooch, silver, with a pale blue stone in the center. I hadn't seen it in decades. Thank you, I said, closing my fingers around it. He turned to go, but paused at the gate. I hope one day, Jacob will get to know you the way I should have, he said, his voice low. I didn't answer. Some things didn't need a reply. As he walked back to his car, I stepped inside, holding the brooch tight. The house was full now, laughter in the kitchen, music warming the corners, Janelle waving me over. I placed the brooch in the dish by the door and shut it gently behind me. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you once loved? Tell us in the comments. The grand opening wasn't grand in the traditional sense. No balloons or ribbon cutting, no news crews or speeches. But it was grand in the way that mattered. Warm. Honest. Full of life. We called it the gathering at Marjorie's house. A community celebration to honor what this old home had become. A place where people felt seen, welcomed, and valued. A house that had once raised a boy. Then nearly broke with silence, but now thrived with purpose. The living room was full that afternoon. Folding chairs lined the walls, and the old dining table was stacked with homemade pies and trays of finger sandwiches. People filtered in slowly. Nurses, students, neighbors, church friends, even a few familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. I wore my navy blue dress again. The one I'd worn to Darren's party months before. But this time, it wasn't armor. It was celebration. Marissa stood near the fireplace, clipboard in hand, keeping everything moving. Janelle set out teacups and fresh flowers. Saul brought in an old radio that played soft jazz, just like George used to love. Near the front door, a framed sign read, "Welcome to Marjorie's house, where care is given, stories are shared, and family is chosen." People wandered through the rooms, now fully transformed. Darren's old bedroom had become a reading nook, with shelves full of medical textbooks, memoirs, and poetry. George's study now held a small desk for student journaling, and a display of vintage nursing tools. The guest room had 2 twin beds, freshly made, for visiting students who needed a place to stay during rotations. Photos lined the hallway. One of me in my nurse's uniform. One of George by the lake. One of Darren as a boy, smiling in front of his first bicycle. And new ones, too. Of Janelle teaching CPR. Of Saul leading a discussion group. Of Lily sitting on the porch with me, drinking iced tea on a warm day. Yes, Lily came. Again. She arrived just before we began our welcome circle. Standing shyly at the doorway. "I brought a poem," she said. "I wrote it in class." I hugged her without a word. She read it aloud in the living room, her voice soft but steady. It was called Inheritance. I thought it meant money, or things left behind. But you showed me its kindness and stories and time. It's a teacup filled gently, a lap to collapse in. A voice that says firmly, "You still matter. You always have." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. When she finished, the applause was gentle and real. The kind that says, "You're safe here." I stood to speak next. I hadn't planned a long speech. Just a few words. This house has seen many seasons, I said. It was built on love, weathered grief, held laughter and silence and betrayal. But now it lives again. Not for the past, but for the future. For all of you. I looked around the room and saw what I'd never expected to see again at this stage of life. My place. My people. My son doesn't live here anymore, I continued. But the love I gave him didn't die. It simply found a new home. There was quiet. The good kind. The kind that wraps around you like a favorite sweater. Later, I stood at the kitchen window, watching as people wandered the garden, voices mingling with birdsong. Saul joined me, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. You know, he said, some folks wait their whole lives to feel useful. You managed to do it twice. I smiled. Maybe I just needed a second act. He chuckled. Best second act I've ever seen. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the walls, I took one last walk through the house. I passed the hallway photo of George and paused. I touched the frame lightly. You were right, I whispered. I am stronger than I thought. And then, for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from remembering everything and still choosing joy. I ended the night on the porch, Lily curled beside me with a blanket on her lap, Janelle and Saul sharing a laugh on the steps, the others slowly heading home. The porch light glowed warm. The stars peeked through the trees. And inside, behind us, Marjorie's house stood full of stories, of people, of purpose. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that dignity cannot be taken, that love, when given freely, always finds its way back, and that even after betrayal, even after silence and sorrow, something new can bloom, something beautiful, something real.